committee. And so we're going to ask Senator Huff. We have SB 172, school districts, open enrollment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who's the sixth? Where's the sixth one? Where's Vargas?
No.
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy New Year, Mr. Chairman.
Happy New Year to you, too.
I have before us today SB 172. You all have read your analyses. You have your ideas. Many of you already programmed in your brain. But I want to ask you simply, block that out right now and understand what this bill is. It's a name change. There's no substance. It's a name change. There's some concern it might be a spot bill. I assure you. I will bring it back to you, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, and we will go over anything that changes, because that is not the intent of this bill to be a spot bill or anything substantive. It's a name change. In this legislature, we pass many bills. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. When we do things unintended, we often come back and clean them up. That's what I'm trying to do with this. Schools on the list of 1,000 are currently deemed low achieving according to a specific formula prescribed by law. Earlier this year, the governor vetoed AB 47, which attempted to dramatically alter the formula for the open enrollment list. The veto underscores how challenging it has been to come up with an alternative method for the school list that satisfies all stakeholders. SB 172 is an attempt to at least achieve some of the less controversial changes in order to help school districts. The chief concern from school districts we have heard is being publicly labeled low achieving when they've actually made progress, despite relatively higher test scores. So SB 172 would replace this label of low achieving with a far more benign but more positive open enrollment label. Open enrollment is never meant to be punitive or to have a stigma. School choice for parents and kids, not subjective labels, is the underlying purpose of the Open Enrollment Act. Some school districts like school choice, some don't. Of course, I like choice, you know that. Nobody likes to be labeled substandard. In fact, the State Board of Education deemed this an appropriate policy prescription when crafting regulations for the law. For the very reason I'm here today, the board decided that state regulations should say open enrollment schools and not low achieving. The bill aligns state law with those regulations. This bill does. Unfortunately, because there is still a state law, many school districts worry about being identified as low achieving. We hear that all the time. So again, simply trying to change it from something with a stigma to something that's positive. Much like we might call legislators mentally challenged as opposed to stupid. But it's the same concept. In 2003, I was a little levity because you guys are still a little... Oh, thank you. Okay. In 2003, the legislature changed the, quote, low-performing school, end quote, block grant to the high-priority school block grant. Same kind of a principle. No substantive change. It's how you label it. This bill is the same thing with open enrollment. So I would ask for your support for this very, very, very simple bill. And I have Bill Lucia here and
Good.
another witness.
Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with Ed Voice.
Are you on?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Now we can.
Bill Lucia with Ed Voice, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year. We do support the bill. We also wanted to point out that we've been, as you all know, we've been heavily involved in advocating for the opportunity of choices for students. And we wanted to underscore that the reasons why we support the bill include having been heavily active in participating with the State Board of Education in their development of regulations November and December of 2010 on this. And this specific change was the subject of exhaustive conversation, literally hours of testimony, conversation, working in fact back and forth with OAL to determine whether or not there was a way to deal with this issue of the scarlet letter, essentially, and whether the focus of the program is about the instance of the performance of individual schools, or more importantly, from our perspective as advocates for multiple public school options, is the idea of the opportunity for children to be able to utilize this program outside of the other inter and intra-district choice programs that are available. And the number one argument that was made by opponents during the conversations last year on a legislation that the governor vetoed, as you know, that was much more comprehensive in terms of not only changing the label, but also the formula and so on and so forth, was the concern about being categorized in a certain way. This bill, as it's proposing to change the program, does not change the fact that parents still must choose a higher performing school. It doesn't change the program whatsoever in terms of the mechanism and the lens of how to characterize which schools would be put on the list and which would not be. We think that this would be a healthy change in the statute so that as parents and school officials look at this legislation, it's about the opportunity for open enrollment within the public education system. Thank you.
Other witnesses in support?
Mike Kilborn, representing the Orange County Department of Education. We are in support. This is deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say. I was here when we changed the low-performing program to the high-priority program. And remember, the discussion at the time was a concern about the labeling on how the parents and how the children and how the staff would respond, being labeled low-performing, and so we changed it. So this is, I don't see how this is any different than what we did before. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other witnesses in support? Are there witnesses in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Sherry Griffith with the Association of California School Administrators, and we are in opposition to the measure. We do appreciate the Senator's concern, however, with the stigma that has been applied to a number of schools in California. Actually, 130 schools sought waivers this last year and were granted those waivers by the State Board of Education because their schools exceeded 800 on the API and or had no schools in program improvement, yet they were on this list for district choice and parents allowing to leave those districts for higher performing schools. We do think that this law has created confusion for parents and also impacted the morale when high achieving schools have been identified, and so we indeed encourage the author to continue to work with all of us to find a consensus on an appropriate formula to meet the intent of this statute, which, as we understand it, is to ensure that parents can leave low-achieving schools to go to higher-achieving schools. We don't see how changing the name from low-achieving to open enrollment will address this issue. We are also concerned that by changing the name, those districts that currently are working to seek waivers from the board because they are high achieving will then be told they're no longer low achieving because of the name change, and so that it could create a challenge for those schools who want to seek those waivers. Finally, we sponsored a bill that this committee supported last year, AB 47, which would have defined a different construct for lowest achieving. That bill was vetoed by the governor, but in that message he said we should carefully review the implementation effects of this statute before making any additional changes. And we believe a better use of time would be to spend the next 2 to 3 years looking at the impact of this choice program to see if it's truly meeting the needs of families. And for those reasons, we oppose the measure.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses in opposition? Let's bring it back. Members of the committee wish to make a... Senator Ahlquist.
Thank you. I'm not able to vote for the bill currently with the current title. I believe you when you say it's not a spot bill. And Senator Huff, the reason I can't vote for it with its current name is that I think it's very confusing to parents to call these schools open enrollment schools, because there are a lot of school districts in California that have open enrollment program. I, fortunately or unfortunately, began the practice of creating a line at 5 o'clock in the morning when my younger son had dyslexia, and I left being PTA president at the Los Altos Cupertino Union School District School to stand in line at 5 in the morning for the program in Cupertino. For me, if it had a different name, but I think it's a very confusing name because it's identified with other kinds of programs. And I think parents, and you know I believe parents have the right to, as long as the other school district is not impacted, have the right to go to any public school.
Is there a different name you would like? I'm open. That's not open enrollment, I'm just open.
Right.
I'd be happy to talk with you about
Yeah,
it, and perhaps the chair has some thoughts.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. I, too, would like to, I personally would like us to hold this bill in the committee. I think that what we're talking about, there are options for choice. What we know now is that by keeping the term low-achieving school, we have provided for that according to the definition of low-achieving schools, that those parents that were in those identified, I think it's the 1,000, would be able to engage in choice, one of the other things, to give those parents. So there is a linkage between achievement and providing parents who are in those schools with the idea of now having greater choice. This breaks that link. And it was pointed out by I think the representative from the AXA, that last year we said, well, the real core problem may be what schools are on that low-achieving list. And I think Assemblymember Huffman changed the court so that, in truth, the low-achieving schools would be low-achieving schools, and that we would keep that link and that those parents would have choice. The governor said he did not want to make those kinds of changes. So what you've done is kind of take the next step, and I appreciate that. But the problem to me is that you remove this link and you send a message to parents that we're really talking about open enrollment now, not low achieving, and that's what the focus of this was, those that were low achieving. And as was pointed out, there were 130 that had school that were on that list. 103 have already, I believe, they asked for waivers. 103 have been granted. The 27 are now in the works than before. So every school that's on that list that feels like they have not been, they do not deserve to be on that list, have been granted a waiver. So I see this as a solution right now in search of a problem, and it sends the wrong message, I think, to parents. So for that reason, I cannot support the bill today.
I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense to try and correct the lexicon that we use because of the issue that was raised previously of a potential stigmatization, which may not, in fact, be warranted given the test scores. As I remember the Race to the Top debate as we had it a couple of years ago, the initial idea was that it would target those schools around the state that technically were low achieving by a particular definition. And then there was a concern that if it were a strict number-based approach, it might be geographically prejudiced towards certain areas of the state or certain populations or certain communities. And after a lot of discussion, I think we found a compromise that said it would be the lower achieving schools throughout the state where it would not necessarily be, the definition would be low, but lower relative to the peer group of other schools in the community. So I think the author's on the right track to address this perhaps mislabeling of being truly low achieving. Open enrollment is one option, or more accurately, they are simply lower achieving relative to their peers, which in some ways destigmatizes. I mean, to be the shortest center in the NBA doesn't mean that you're not a particularly tall person. And so to use a term that qualitatively describes the differences without stigmatizing those who are in those schools may be a path. And I don't know if the authors wanted to hold this bill. I hope we can revisit this issue if the author chooses to, or if it moves forward, perhaps we can fine-tune the definition. But I do think the author's addressing a very real problem in the current statute, which could be fixed relatively easily.
Thank you.
Could I? Oh,
let's just hear that. Certainly you may. Any other members of the committee wish to say anything? Senator Huff, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
that? I
thank
think
you,
that
Mr.
was
Chairman.
one of the suggestions, and I think not prepared today to deal with lower rather than low, but I think that moves it, that keeps that connection. And I think that you are trying to deal with the issue, but I still think that the core issue we dealt with last year, and that is how do you get on that list? And do these really reflect the lower or the low achieving schools? And we tried to work out a compromise with Assemblymember Huffman last year. That was not, the governor did not want to change the definition. I think there is an issue out there, but I think this creates more confusion than it answers the question. So that's my response.
Well, and I appreciate what Senator Alquist had said, and I hadn't fully appreciated that, people could confuse the label that I had chosen. I'm open. There's no pride of ownership here. I'm trying to take the stigma away, and I
Right.
think that Senator Blakesley's comment about maybe lower, maybe it's something else. I would pledge to you, Mr. Chairman, I know you want to hold this and go on. If you hold it, it's dead.
Well, we would still be very considerate if you put a new bill in and came back to this committee under a new, we would work with you to find something that maintains the integrity of this connection between achievement in schools, that parents have a right, if they are on that list from low achieving schools, to have choice. That's really what we're saying, and we're not prepared now to break that link at this moment. But if you can work with us to meet both your needs and ours.
Here's what I would pledge to you. If you pull this out, you own this bill. I would work with you. If you allow it to move in the process, we'll change it in the Assembly to however you want. We'll bring it back to this committee. You either like it or you don't, so that we work together cooperatively. To kill it and introduce another one seems like a tremendous waste of legislative talent around here when we can do the same thing with this vehicle. I'm willing to work in any way. Again, I'm just trying to remove a stigma. When you start getting into the formula of how you get on the list, that's a different discussion. It may need to happen, but that's not this. This is just trying to destigmatize something that has been the most common battle cry against this, is, my God, we got better and we're low-performing schools. And so, you want to encourage people that are doing the right thing. That's all this is trying to do.
Yet you do realize that we are saying to parents, we are holding schools accountable. Those that are in low-achieving schools have a right to choice. And so there is a tremendous, that is the step that we were providing. Now you want to, it's just difficult for me. I understand your issues around stigmatization, but there was a reason that we had that link. And I'm not willing to break that link, even though I understand what you're saying.
Well, again, I pledge to work with you, Mr. Chairman, on that so that it would not go forward without your blessing. But if we could just pass it on, keep it on the process, you and I have a good enough working relationship.
Mr. Chairman?
The members. Yes.
I'm going to support the chair this morning in his desire to keep the bill in committee, largely because I think the conversation so far suggests we're not going to sort out the wordsmithing challenge anytime in the next 30 minutes or so. And so, as painful as it is, and if I were in your shoes, Senator, I would be making exactly the argument you were making. I just don't think it's going to get sorted out in the next 30 minutes. That being said, I am fundamentally in sync with the argument you are making. And I respectfully don't think lower is the right word. The challenge is that we had a piece of legislation, and I sat in the committee when it was debated at great length with my colleagues here. We had a piece of legislation that broke some new ground, and once it was implemented, what we discovered was that the structure of the bill meant that there were schools identified, as you said in your opening remarks, which are not low-performing schools by any reasonable definition we use here in California. So it is inaccurate and misleading to tell people that they are low-performing schools. They are performing appreciably better than schools in their region in many instances, but those are larger districts where the 10%, as I recall, threshold kicked in and said no more than this number of schools from any one district will be so designated. That meant that schools that were doing appreciably better were then designated as low-performing schools. That is, as you suggested, both misleading and on its face inaccurate. So I actually think your language is pretty good language. I'm comfortable with the language. And because what we're trying to say is you've got an open enrollment option. That's an accurate piece of information that we need to communicate to parents under the bill. But if we were If we really were in a situation where we were accurately identifying them as low-performing schools, I probably would say, you know what, call it what it is. If that's what it is, that's what it is. But the structure that we have in place now, and which remains in place after the governor's veto, I think leaves us with a process that confuses rather than clarifies for parents what the circumstances are that their kids facing and what the choices are that they have to make. I supported the Huffman bill last year in its form as it came out of this committee. Governor obviously had a different point of view, and if we're stuck where we're stuck, I do think getting the language right is important. I think that doesn't mean the conversation about whether or not the process should change ought to come to an end, but I do think your point's well taken that we're miscommunicating the point. So I'm going to back the chair just because I don't think we're going to get this semantic debate sorted out this morning, but I do hope you'll come back with the same bill, and hopefully you can make your case persuasively to the chair and a majority of the members.
Well, we've heard a lot of interesting discussion on what I thought was a very simple bill. I still think it is. And I think it's an important, in destigmatizing this. So again, should you change your mind, Mr. Chair, I don't expect to get this settled in the next 30 seconds, but I would expect that we could find some common ground.
And I pledge now to work with you. I understand where you're coming. I think that what we do now sends the terminology. I appreciate, and I think Senator Simitian really laid out a very clear understanding of what the issues are. That yes, there was some I think you're trying to, rather than deal with some of the fundamental flaws, to change the title. But the issue really is that we could not get the governor to deal with the fundamental flaw, and I, at this moment, do not want to break that linkage that allows parents from lower achieving or low achieving schools to have that option of choice. Question is, are they really on that list because they're low achieving, or are they on that list because of other kind of reasons that any school district can't have more than 10%, so that meant that other school districts had schools that were slightly higher or higher on that list. I appreciate there are problems. I too supported the Huffman bill. I'm just not ready yet to move in this direction and send that message that moving towards open enrollment. So what would you like? Your choice.
Well, really, my choice would be keep it alive, work with you, bring it back with any change at all. It seems like it accomplishes the same thing. I don't know that there's any benefit of killing it and me going through the exercise of coming up with another bill, only to be working with you to come to the same outcome we could with this. So it's really up to you.
I don't think I have that much to add to the debate. I just simply would note that I believe that bills have to actually pass the House of Origin by the end of the month. And I would associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Simitian. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I have problems with the way we label whatever the label is that we choose right now, and whether or not there are better ways of defining progress and letting parents know things. It's hard to believe that with our legislative deadlines it could happen this year. But hopefully we'll continue that conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the intent is to work with the chair, even though it's in the other house, so that, and we would bring it back here with any change so everybody's completely comfortable with it. I would pledge that to you.
Senator Vargas,
I wasn't going to speak on this issue, but I always think a courtesy is a nice thing. And I would associate myself with what Joe Simitian says always.
Okay.
But
always.
But
thank you.
Don't text that to him while you're driving.
Then I will say, let the members make that choice. I will say that we will, if we keep it right now, if it moves forward as open enrollment, I will call this bill back to committee. I cannot accept that. I need a clearer. What you're saying is, let's have a clear definition that reflects the actual status of why you're getting choice and does not stigmatize. I hear that. So in listening to you, I'd be willing to move this bill forward today. But unless, and I would request that you work with me.
Absolutely.
That I will oppose the bill as we move forward, unless we can come up with some better terminology. I do not want us to say, send the message that we're really, because of this bill, opening up open enrollment to all students. I don't think that's the message. I don't think, as you're saying, you want to do that. So with that, we're going to pass this out as a work in progress with the idea, if the members want to, because I hear my members saying that let's in the spirit of, we understand there are problems with the underlying definition, and the compromises that were made. But I don't think this solves the problem, and so
We'll work on it, and I greatly appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
With that, is there a motion on the bill?
I move the bill.
Bill's been moved by Senator Alquist, with the understanding that the author will work with the chair, and we will come up with another definition. If we can't, we're going to call this bill back.
Yes.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Lowenthal,
Aye.
Renner, Alquist,
Aye.
Blakesley,
Aye.
Hancock,
No.
Huff,
Aye.
Lou,
Aye.
Price, Semidian,
Aye.
Vargas,
Aye.
That bill has sufficient votes for passage. We'll hold it open for the absent
Thank you,
members.
members.
Thank you.
Appreciate the consideration.
Yeah, let's open up the roll. We voted before we had the roll, so we're going to, we do things a little differently here in the Senate. So let's find out who really is here and who voted.
Lowenthal,
I'm here.
Renner, Alquist,
I'm here too.
Blakesley, Hancock, Huff, Lou, Price, Semidian, Vargas.
We have a quorum. Let us again re-vote on the bill because we could not vote before we had a quorum. The bill's been moved by Senator Alquist. We had a test vote. Let's see what the real vote turns out to be. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Lowenthal,
Aye.
Renner, Alquist,
Aye.
Blakesley, Hancock,
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Huff, Lou,
Aye.
Price, Semidian, Vargas.
Aye.
We have 8 votes. That's sufficient for passage. We'll hold it open for the absent members. I believe there's one more bill, and I will be presenting that bill. SB 722. Senator Huff.
Ask him to hold the bill.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And by the way, I have another bill that I have to present in Governance and Finance. So if you can move this right along, it'd be very appreciated by the.
Good morning. I'll move as quickly as I can. SB 721 is the post-secondary education statewide goals. I'm here to present this bill, which takes the first step towards establishing greater clarity and accountability for our post-secondary educational performance in meeting the needs of the state. This bill does 3 important things. It articulates statewide goals for post-secondary education. Second, it creates a workshop to be convened by the Legislative Analyst's Office to develop the specific metrics for measuring progress towards these goals. I think that's really critical. And third, it creates an annual reporting process on our progress towards these goals as part of the annual budget process. Although California has been very slow to move in this direction, this is not a new concept. The Senate and the legislature have been developing, supporting, refining proposals to deal with goal setting for over 10 years now, since I think it was Senator Alpert was the first to introduce the first iteration of a bill like this, although this bill has evolved. And this bill reflects the latest evolution of these efforts. I just want to note a few things. There's been a growing national trend towards state accountability systems for higher education. Many states have implemented statewide accountability programs that include goals and performance measures and associated funding models. and the National Governors Association is doing extensive work to support all these state efforts in this regard. A recent review of the master plan for higher education by our joint committee of both houses found that we have not articulated goals for higher education, and the lack of goals inhibits accountability across the systems and within each segment for ensuring outcomes that are necessary to meet the needs of the state. While our segments all engage in some data gathering and that they're looking for ways to ensure access and success of their students, their individual efforts are not coordinated, nor do they reflect a statewide approach to higher education policy planning. Several reports conducted by our own LAO have highlighted the need for a public agenda and specifically the need to articulate the state's post-secondary education needs by having the legislature set specific goals and identify key outcomes that are important to the state. Our current economic climate now make it especially important that we be clear about our priorities and the use of public funds that we provide for our students and for our institutions. If we're clear about the goals and the measures, then we can be clearer about the budget and the policy decisions that are necessary to support higher education in getting there. This bill is the first step towards that objective. I'm committed to working collaboratively with the governor's office, with the legislature, with the assembly, and all the segments of higher education to further refine the bill's contents as we move forward. I ask for your eye on this important bill. I have one more statement. One more thing is just that while the LAO does not take a position on bills, this legislation is consistent with much of their recent work and the reporting that has been done by that office, and the LAO does play a role in facilitating the process that's outlined in this bill, and I have asked them to be here to comment on the bill as well as to assist us in answering any questions that are raised by the committee. Thank you, and I have witnesses in support, but I'd really like the LAO, which has really spent a great deal of time since 2010 focusing on this issue and the need for us to move forward in the bill somewhat similar to. I'm not saying these are all the things that we want on the goals, or this is the best way to measure those as to set up a process, but what we've done is set up that process, and I ask for your support and I ask for your input as we move this forward.
Mr. Chairman and
yes.
Senator Lowenthal, before the LAO speaks, because the LAO's comments may go to this, if we're going to have goals, which I think we should, and I support
yes.
the bill, then we have to have some measurable data to help us identify whether
yes.
or not we've reached those goals. The previous governor, Governor Schwarzenegger, sort of put things on hold when he eliminated some of the funding in the budget last time around. The current governor has also evidenced a great deal of skepticism. He's been quite public about education data and the utility. I'm hoping that we all will make a believer of the administration over some period of time. But if you, I just want to say that the data is a key element in accountability and goal-driven systems.
Absolutely.
And if the LAO would care to comment on that.
Absolutely. That is critical to this, and that's the second part of the bill.
Look forward to working with the chair on the data
right.
component.
That is part of, that is included in the bill, how we're going to have objective, quantifiable data too. And that data, starting in January, I believe January 15th of 2013, shall be presented back to the legislature each year following that by the LAO in reports with whatever we've come up as the quantifiable data that we're going to be using for us to make decisions about our budget for higher education. And with that, I ask the LAO to respond, and especially to the comments that Senator Simitian has raised, the difficulty in developing a collaborative approach between the legislature and the governor in terms of quantification and measurement.
So go ahead. Thanks, Senator Huff, Senator Lowenthal, and members. As Senator Lowenthal mentioned, our officers take a position on bills, but we have been engaged in this conversation that's been taking place, as Senator mentioned, well over a decade, going back to the 2002 Joint Committee on the Master Plan and Senator Alquist's 1331, which kind of came out of that. And since that time, there's been a pretty robust conversation involving the Senate, the Assembly, our office, the segments, the administration, other stakeholders. And as the committee analysis notes, through that time, there's been a number of efforts, legislative efforts and gubernatorial efforts to try and create some kind of higher education goals and some kind of framework, and none of those have been entirely successful. And in the meantime, most other states have kind of moved past us on being able to set up some kinds of structures like this, which, as Senator Lowenthal points out, has really been, I think, important for improving higher education attainment and efficiency in other states. So I mentioned that our office has been part of this conversation, and we have released 2 reports recently. 2010, as part of our master plan series on the 50th anniversary, we put out Greater Than the Sum of Its Parts, Coordinating Higher Education in California, that really looked at the need for greater oversight and coordination in the higher education system. And again, as Senator Lowenthal points out, the Joint Committee also brought up that theme of the lack of goals and coordination. And then just last week, we put out a new report, Improving Higher Education Oversight. You and the legislature asked us to put out, in response to the governor's proposal last year, to eliminate CPEC, which in fact has happened. So both these publications emphasize the need to improve higher education coordination and oversight, and really recommend that the state start by establishing goals. Again, as hard as it is really to I think wrap your head around it, the state hasn't done a real good job of establishing clear, meaningful, prioritized, finite number of workable goals for the state. The master plan instead has had more kind of values we want to emphasize about access and about affordability, but those really haven't been structured as goals to be achieved that can be measured. Which I think gets to Senator Simitian's point that that the setting of goals, once that is done, you need some way to measure how are we doing, and are we doing better, and if in areas we're not doing better, what are the causes of that, and how can we change our policies and budgets in order to improve progress. So I think that data link is really an important one. And then the third stage, once that is done, you need to be able to link that data and that analysis back to your policy and budget making. And this bill, Senate Bill 731, I think does all 3 of those things, as Senator Lowenthal points out. It sets up a framework for that, but it recognizes, and again, I think it's one of those lessons learned over the last 10 years, that this has to be built as a collaborative process with broad buy-in by all the key stakeholders. There's a lot of technical issues, particularly in the data part, that need to be handled. And it's not just simply something I think that you can just take care of in a bill and call it done. So as a result, this bill, I think, tries to establish a process. I wanted to just speak to our office's role in that process. First, as Senator Lowenthal points out, we'd be asked to convene a working group of all the key stakeholders, including the administration, including the segments, including both houses, both parties. We want to emphasize that we view our role as a facilitator of a collaborative process. Second, our office will be asked to compile that data once we've kind of identified what those data points are, what those metrics are between 6 and 12, a finite, usable number. Once that's come up with, we would be collecting that data and then annually compiling that data and publishing it, as well as offering to the legislature our assessment of what that means and our recommendations on what that would suggest that the legislature may want to consider in terms of changes to policies and budget. Again, I would emphasize that data would be broadly available for others to come up with their own assessments and their own recommendations. Because I think that's probably another one of these lessons learned, that it's really not reasonable to expect that you could just get the data to kind of automatically drive policy and budget choices. Instead, the policymakers need to be able to annually look at this and engage and think about trade-offs. Are there adjustments that need to be made? Are there changes to targets that you might want to make? Are there policy and budget changes that need to be made? So I think that what is valuable about this is not just that it sets up this way to set goals and set targets and come up with metrics, but it really seeks to re-engage the policymakers on using that data and measuring and adjusting your policies and progress towards your goals. So with that, again, our office is happy to assist in its role as envisioned under this legislation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great.
Any questions for the LAO right now? Or? Yeah, okay. Other witnesses, go ahead and get your...
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Marlene Garcia, and I'm with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And we are supportive of the framework that's established in this bill and have been working closely with the legislature on this goal for a number of years. As a matter of fact, then Senator Jack Scott was author of a similar bill. But I really want to thank the author and the staff for the work they've put in the LAO in really taking this and refining this important framework for higher ed. California is known for being data rich and knowledge poor when it comes to assessing the overall progress and priorities of higher education. I think it's important to keep in mind that the data is a tool that we can use to sharpen our focus and analysis of where it is we're making progress and where it is we need to shore up. And I think the bottom line is that we are able to assess how students are benefiting for our higher ed system, how they're progressing, and ultimately how they're succeeding. This is also a tool that, in the way it's structured in the bill, provides for just some disaggregation to look at various subgroups and how they also are persisting and ultimately completing their degree so that they can get into that workforce. We think that that's a really important part of this effort, especially in our segment, which is highly diverse, and we deal with students from all different levels, but really gauging that progress is critical. And we have learned in the past year, especially in the work of our Student Success Task Force, how important it is to identify momentum points in the process of persistence to figure out, whether students in fact are accomplishing what they set out to do. So we look forward to working with the author and his staff. Our main issue at this point will be to work to ensure that the work we've done with the task force, with our Student Success Task Force, which identifies this as a central component to really gauge how our students are progressing and completing, that we work with the author to ensure that there's some alignment in that we don't work at cross purposes, but in fact our scorecard, if you will, which is what the Board of Governors has recently endorsed in the Student Success Task Force recommendation, in fact measures the progress of our students in completing courses, in meeting those momentum points by campus, and then ultimately feeding the state with the information you need to know so that you can make decisions about whether in fact we're headed in the right direction for the state of California. So with that, we urge your support.
Next witness.
Chair, members, Nadia Leal Carrillo with the University of California. Also in support of the concept of the bill, we look forward to working with all of the stakeholders and really appreciate the authors and his staff's commitment to engage us in this process. We too are particularly interested in how those three goals will sort of align and fit the needs also of the university, and taking into consideration also its research aspect and all that. So we just want to just thank again the LAO, the author, the committee staff, and everyone that's put some work in this effort, and we look forward to being a participant in the ongoing discussions as the bill moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Andrew Martinez, California State University. We'd like to thank the author for introducing this bill and the work that he's done so far. We support the efforts that he's going forward. We've worked diligently on this issue in the past, and we look forward to working on this issue as going forward.
Okay. Any other witnesses in support? Witnesses opposed? Bring it back to the committee for questions of LAO, of the author, of witnesses.
I have a question.
Senator Liu.
Comments. I really appreciate the work or the ideas or the concepts that are trying to be incorporated in here. I think it's been very frustrating for a lot of us who care about higher ed to see the demise of certain institutions over the past several years, and then the inability of us to really fulfill the master plan, whatever those concepts were committed to during the 60s. I'm curious, though, to who is it, the LAO that devised the statewide goals?
No.
How those goals come apart?
No, go on.
Well, as I understand it, we would have no role in setting goals. The bill itself contains some, I think, pretty broad goals that then there'd be some effort to kind of deconstruct what that means in terms of particular metrics. That'd be part of this broader working group. But perhaps
Yeah,
Senator
we try to
Lowenthal.
build upon the goals that have been presented before. These seem to be and we are not committed to working with all the participants as to begin to refine those. Basically, the 3 goals, that we have that have been stated before in the state. We've never been able to move even these 3 forward. Are first measures of student success, which can be disaggregated.
Right. I mean, I really I commend the idea of focusing on students, and I understand that, and the LAO is going to talk about metrics and how we do this.
That's right.
But I think and I guess in terms of state needs, is that probably going to be ferreted out in the second better align in degrees and credentials?
Right, the second, I just want to say that may be the second one. So that's the first goal, is the measurement of students. Variety of ways that can be measured. As Senator Simitian said, we've kind of handcuffed ourselves a little bit. But we do have, with the institutions, each one having their own measures, all of us working together, we do have data. As was pointed out, we're data rich and knowledge poor. And the second point would be, how do we align our outcomes, whether it's degrees and credentials, with the state's needs in terms of workplace needs, and also in terms of civic responsibility and civic needs in terms of what kinds of students we want to turn out. And the third one is, how do we increase efficiency of the institutions, again, so that desired post-secondary outcomes that we're going to be measuring can be achieved without having a system that increasingly asks for additional resources that we live within our means. And so we have to look at how we design this to live with. We're in an era where efficiency has to be part of our statewide goals.
So with the intent of,
but there may be others as this
correct.
bill, and we're going to ask for that, and we're going to work collaboratively.
My question is it for the LAO? How do other states, because you talked about other states having a better process or a different process in terms of determining higher education goals? Is this what is being proposed typical, as opposed to having anyways? Is this situation typical of through statute and then through using the LAO as some governmental body to determine the workings of how we get back to our goals? Is this one of those models?
There's a number of different models, Senator. I think this is one. I think the general framework here is pretty common, that you would establish some broad goals in statute. I think frequently a lot of states then try not to lock down particular metrics or particular smaller targets into statute. That's something that they want to leave available to modify in the annual process. I guess one thing that maybe is a little bit different is most states have a coordinating agency like CPAC.
CPAC, right.
And this bill, I think, creates a framework where it doesn't require that kind of agency. Instead, as I said, I think our office plays part of a role there on kind of compiling data and making that available. But I think the bill looks to all players to be able to make use of that data and to try and inform the policy process. So that's probably the main structural difference, is that most other states have an agency like that, which we don't.
Right. And just a little concerned, because we've parked the data for the CPEC demise with the community colleges, and it's been kind of dispersed around, and it's just so
there's some under the table.
Some under the table, right?
It's
so it's
all
just,
around. We don't know where it is.
Right. So I'm concerned about how we all get this under control.
And so are we. And this, we believe, is a logical first step. But you do raise, with the demise of CPEC and with that data, that's why we've got to get everybody together.
Senator, I think these two issues are obviously inexorably interwoven. The management of the collection and management of data and a data system worthy of that name in the state, and the goal setting. They are, in my view, two distinct and separate issues, right, but they are clearly linked. And I share the views that Senator Lewis articulated. We're at risk of we've made too little progress too slowly over the last decade in terms of education data. That has meant that we are unable then to make the kind of progress you would like to see us make on accountability and goal setting. I worry that if we don't sort of recapture what momentum we had pretty darn quickly, we may lose the ability altogether. I think that's bad for students, K through 12 and higher education. I also think it's going to mean that we forfeit significant federal funds if we don't get our data act together pretty quickly. But again, you can't know if you're reaching your goals if you don't have the data to tell you, and I think Senator Liu's points are right on target.
Well, I have another concern too. I mean, do goals not change? I mean, the evaluation. I mean, is there a kind of a time limit that we go back and re-examine?
Yeah, the way the bill is written is that every year that there's a process by the LAO reporting. It'll be part of the LAO's to report on our progress towards that, and then the policy and budget committees of the legislature. And then as that unfolds, I think we will then have the ability to modify our goals and do that. But that's not in the statute, a formal process to change the goals at this point.
Okay. No, it's all right. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Author, I support what you're attempting to do here. I just want to provide a little feedback, if I could.
Sure.
Most of the discussion has been on goal setting and metrics. I wanted to speak to the third item that you've identified, specifically increase efficiency.
Yes.
As you move forward, I might suggest that be a more muscular find a more muscular way to talk about controlling cost. As we know, healthcare costs are exploding, higher education costs are exploding. This question of affordability is becoming, I think, very sensitive to all of us. There is the question of state resources, but as the costs grow ever faster than the rate of inflation, we begin to reach a point where we have a hard time keeping up, and we look at chancellors' salaries, which in some cases are approaching $500,000 a year, and oftentimes foundations throw extra money on top of that, and there's car allowances and housing allowances and pensions which go still further. And I think we're potentially reaching a critical point where if we simply look at the concept of efficiency, we may not be putting a bright enough spotlight on this question of whether or not we're controlling growing costs.
I think that's a very good point, and I commit to working on that issue. And I think that was the intent. It may not be the language exactly, but the idea is really maybe not clearly articulated, but to deal with a broader thing than just efficiency.
Thank you, Arthur. I think that would help with the CSU trustees, the community college league and foundations, and governing boards, and even community college boards, if this was clearly articulated.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Blakesley. Any other questions? Senator Liu, did I cut you off early?
Senator Huff?
Senator Hancock?
Yeah. This isn't really a question, but I do hope that as this process goes forward and we involve the trustees and a variety of people, we'll also involve the faculty of these institutions. I think just like in our K-12 institutions, too often we don't have real involvement of the people interfacing with the students, and that it deprofessionalizes them, and it keeps their ideas about what would actually work, which are often really good ideas, out of the process. So I'm happy to support the bill. I think that's in agreement with Senator Blakesley's comments about efficiency being a word that we're really talking about how we get an educated population ready to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
I move the bill.
Did you?
I think we've had a full discussion, Senator Huff, and I believe that we will try to, as you will see, that this is we're trying to complete and embark on something that this legislature for 10 years has been trying to deal with. I think this is a reasonable approach to move us forward, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. Let me ask you a question since I've kept my comments to myself. I would prepare to abstain on this in that I like the concept and it's a work in progress as you described. Sometimes I put my name to things that come back morphed into something I don't really like. I like where it's headed. So I'm willing to support this today if you'll commit to bring it back to us after it winds its way through the process. If this actually is a little more substantive than just changing a name on something.
We'll work on changing the name on that, Senator. But I do make that commitment, Senator.
All right, thank you very much.
I think this is a very important bill, and
Appreciate
I will make that commitment.
We have a motion. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Lowenthal?
Aye.
Renner? Alquist?
Aye.
Blakesley? Hancock?
Aye.
Huff?
Aye.
Luke? Price? Simonian? Vargas?
Let's hold the roll open for 5 minutes.
We'll keep the roll open 5 minutes, and thank you very much, members.
Let's open the roll. Will the secretary? We have 2 bills, SB 172. Huff, will you open the roll and call the absent members?
Renner? Price?
And what is the tally is now 8-0. That bill passes out. Second bill, SB 721, Lowenthal.
Renner? Price?
The bill has 8 votes. That bill passes out. This committee hearing is adjourned.